Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. Stress, anxiety, and PTSD, 3 challenging topics, and 3 issues that likely have, are, or will afflict someone that you know or you personally. Today's guest, Brett Cotter, has 15 years experience in the stress relief field, specializing in group facilitation, one-on-one coaching, and instructional design. He is also the author of 3 Keys to Managing PTSD, The Warrior's Guide to Overcoming Combat Trauma. Brett and I dive deep into all 3 topics: stress, anxiety, and PTSD. I hope that our conversation gives you or your loved ones some tools to address these issues. Thank you for joining us on the Pursuit of Learning. Brett, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning today. I have some topics that I want to dive into with you, including your book, 3 Keys to Managing PTSD. But before we do, I'd like to ask you a question that I normally save to the end of the interview, which is, are there any key topics on your mind that you want to make sure we cover today in our conversation so we don't miss them and we have time for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here with you and having this time to connect. I think a really important thing that I share in all my talks is this technique called stress stopper breath work. It's a really simple way, the quickest way that I found, that shuts down your body's stress reaction and activates your body's relaxation response naturally. So that is one thing I definitely want to share. And then also there's a simple anxiety release technique that I teach that I wanted to share that as well. So I think if we could cover those 2 things at some point in our time together, that would be great.
We will definitely get into the stress stopper breath work. And I've got the note for the anxiety release technique, which would be great. Something that I've chatted with a few guests on, and given the work that you do, I would really be interested to hear what you're seeing with this is with COVID, more and more of us are isolated, we're in lockdowns. And with that isolation, it tends to lead, from what I'm seeing in some people, to an amplification of any mental health challenges that were also present. And even in people who didn't seem to have mental health challenges in advance of COVID, depression and anxiety seem to be creeping up. Are you seeing more of that in the people that you work with and in the communities that you touch regularly?
Yeah. What I'll say about the pandemic in general is that it has activated a very deep guttural stress reaction in all of us on a subconscious and unconscious level that is fueled by the fear of the unknown. So that has triggered a very deep sense of stress, which doesn't shut off so easily, right? Because folks that have been triggered by the news, by the pandemic, it's a myriad of things. It's not seeing loved ones, it's losing loved ones. It's the fear of what's going to happen to me. And then underneath it all is really the fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. Not knowing, in the beginning of the thing, I was concerned about what the logistics were going to be like regarding food, right? Mm-hmm. So in the very beginning of the pandemic, I ordered a few bow and arrow kits for the kids to start using in the backyard. They thought I was crazy, right? But I was like, hey, this might be a good time for us to get our target practice in. You never know if it's going to come in handy.
Just in case. That's right.
Right? So yeah, when in times of high stress for me, it's a time to spend extra time and be diligent with clearing our mind so that we could get creative to face the big challenge that is before us.
We're going to dive deep into PTSD and some of the causes, do you think that if we stay in this uncertain and stressed state long enough, that some of us effectively will be entering into a PTSD like scenario coming out of COVID?
That can be on a societal level, to be honest, right? When you think about all the first responders, the doctors, the nurses, the EMS folks, the firemen, the policemen, the people that even work in the funeral industry, right? The morticians. Two of my friends are morticians. So the things that they have seen, firemen going into houses, highly populated houses, trying to resuscitate people in the middle of the pandemic, right? In the scariest moments of the pandemic. And there's 15 people around them, loved ones freaking out all over them. And they have to say, look, I can't work on this person. I can't do CPR unless you all back up, right? Because of COVID reasons now. So it's just the level of stress, and then first responders, some of them were living away from home because they're around it all day long, right?
So they don't want to get their loved ones
and they don't want to
sick.
get their young kids, their, loved ones, spouses. So the level of stress, I know folks that were living in hotels in the city and motels in the city, instead of going home. And that was really, really tough on all family members. So PTSD, I definitely feel that there's going to be waves of PTSD, within industries within our society. And so like doctors, nurses, first responders and things like that. For them, it was the height of this. It was like, a war zone. And unless you have a loved one that has that job, you're not going to be able to relate to it, because most of us are isolated, in our houses or apartments, wherever we are. And that brings a whole nother kind of stress and isolation and anxiety. And if it's unchecked, it can lead to depression, overwhelm, and things like that. So yeah, the loneliness is a whole nother, component that a civilian or non-first responder would really face. It's like opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're both very traumatic.
You said with the anxiety, if left unchecked. So we can dive into that now to say, well, how should we be checking it? Or we can save till later anxiety release technique. I'm assuming that may be one of the tools that we can use to check that anxiety in advance of it becoming full-blown depression and overwhelm.
The way I think about stress, anxiety, depression, so it starts with a stress reaction, right? And if it continues to be triggered over time, if it's unchecked, that turns into anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. And if that is left unchecked over time, that turns into overwhelm and depression, okay? So the idea is we got to throw a monkey wrench into that system, right? That system just keeps on working and eventually brings us into that state of overwhelm and depression, right? When we feel hopeless, right? So if we could catch it in the first phase, which is the stress phase, right? With stress stopper breath work, now we stopped it there. But most of us don't know stress stopper breath work yet. So we might be in the anxiety phase where you wake up feeling anxious. You're trying to go to sleep, you feel anxious. During the day, you just feel anxious. You don't even know why, right? You just have tension in your chest, maybe in your stomach or in your throat, and you just don't feel right. You feel stressed and anxious. Some folks have generalized anxiety disorder, which they feel tension all over their body, right? And it's just, now that is a very dangerous thing if that's not addressed. And that's where the overwhelm comes in after that, and depression. So, yeah, is there anything you wanted to unpack from that?
No, I think when we get to the stress stopper breath work, that's going to be a tool that we use to check that anxiety once we see it. So I think we'll tackle that there.
Yeah, so another key component to all this is realizing that you are stressed. Most of us are walking around stressed and we don't even know we're stressed. So in the book, I talk about stress signals, right?
That's right.
The number one thing that I found for a really good stress signal is your heart rate, right? If your heart starts pounding, that's your body sounding the alarm. And it's like your car's check engine light, right? Think of your heart as your car's check engine light. If you're not exercising, right? If you're sprinting, you're running, you're exercising, your heart should be beating fast. But if you're at your desk or you're on your couch or you're talking to your spouse or you're dealing with your kids that are, being homeschooled or remote learning, and that's stressful and your heart is pounding, I want a little light bulb to go off in your head and just to say, oh yeah, I'm stressed out again, right? Another stress signal is how you're breathing. If you're taking these short, shallow breaths, like that is a sign that you're stressed out. Another stress signal is your emotional state. If you're upset, if you're angry, if you're depressed, you feel anxious, just a light bulb should go off in your head. Bing, stressed again. And then the last one is your mental state. What thoughts are recurring in your head, right? Throughout the day, most of us have thoughts. It's just like, if you're watching the news and you have that constant news thing across the bottom banner, that's like our thoughts in our head. They're constantly there. Thoughts are happening. But if they're negative thoughts are recycling and going over and over again, that's another sign where a light bulb should just go off and say, oh yeah, my body's just stressed again. Once we know that we're stressed and we've recognized it, that's when we could do something about it. So yeah, this teaches a person to become more aware of their body. And I call that, becoming stress smart when you know every time you're stressed.
And Brett, are there any biometric tools that you recommend people use or wear? I'm thinking wearable technology that helps you spot those sooner, because I would assume that step one is knowing your baseline. How do I normally breathe? What is my normal heart rate? What's my normal mental state, my normal emotional state, to be able to tell when it changes?
So knowing your baseline is really key, and understanding that many of us need to reset our baseline. Most of us are running at 70 miles an hour when we should be at 35.
Okay.
So really understanding what is a healthy baseline for you. Some of us, you might feel like we're on a treadmill, right? And we're not getting anywhere, but we're working really hard, but nothing's changing. Like, it's just like Groundhog Day. Every day is over and over again, right? And we're not getting anywhere. So that in itself can be stressful, and our body is going to start to get anxious. So really dialing it back and really taking on understanding and experiencing deep experiences of relaxation. So meditation is really good for that. Restorative yoga is really good for that. Yoga nidra is really good for that. That's a yoga where you're actually laying down and you're like in this half sleep state, right? And people can do that for hours. But it's very restorative, right? It restores the energy in each one of your cells. So I do a meditation class 3 times a week, and it's a half-hour class, and it goes really deep. We follow the breath and we go in through the heart. We release all the tension from the heart, and then we go deeper towards the back of the heart. And we come into this really wide open space, and then we just start breathing in our own life force energy. And that, when we're in a deep meditative state, you could actually start to direct the life force into each one of your cells, and it's like your cells are directly breathing your own essence. And that's a really good reset of your baseline, because when you come out of that meditation, your mind is completely clear, your emotions are completely calm, and your body feels completely restored. So you're very clear and aware and alert. When I talk about resetting your baseline, I'm talking about really getting in touch with a deeper sense of the human experience. And meditation did that for me 21 years ago, and I've been sharing it with people ever since. That's part of my stress relief practice, the meditation. And that's like the maintenance that keeps like really good gasoline in the car. You know what I mean? Like it keeps your body really in tune with itself, so that when your body does get stressed, you could notice it right away. You don't go 2 or 3 hours without noticing that you're stressed. You could tell folks that are under a lot of stress, they don't even know it. A lot of times their eyes are really wide open, talking really quick, moving really quick. And like you had brought up earlier, which is a great point, this time in our history has brought up every, little twinge of like mental illness that a person might have had. It's amplified, and it's on the table. So our issues are right there on the table to be healed. I feel when an issue comes up, it's like ready to be healed, ready to be embraced, and through unconditional self-love from within oneself, and then those issues start to release. So yeah, I would say the stress stopper breath work is the number one tool to naturally release the stress in the heat of the moment. And if we could jump in now, might be a good time to share that technique.
Let's work our way to that one, and we'll take the listeners through some of the backstory, explain some of the basics around PTSD, and then get them into the 3 keys and work to that stage. Does that work?
Yeah, it's a great idea.
So the one thing I'd love for you to share, if you're comfortable doing it, is you do a lot of work with stress, with PTSD. You've written your book, 3 Keys to Managing PTSD, and in it you share a beautiful dedication which provides the backstory of why this is so important to you. Can you share that with our listeners and give them a bit of a backstory on why this is so important to you, Brett?
Yeah. So I got into this work in 1999, and in 2013, I started seeing on the news like all these news reports about veterans that weren't getting good care, right? And there was like all these scandals, about around the VA and stuff like that. And I've always known that veterans suffer from PTSD, and I have 5 veterans from different conflicts, from different eras, and in different branches of the military in my family. Not all of them suffer from PTSD, but they all have some level of stress from their experience, right? So my dad was in Vietnam. When he came back, he married my mom, had me and my brother, and his PTSD kicked in right away. He turned to drugs and alcohol and partying, and he also was a New York City firefighter with Rescue 3 and Ladder 30 in the 80s, late 70s and 80s. So there's also a lot of stress in that job too, and a lot of things, that he shared with me that, he wished he never saw, right? So getting back to my work and seeing all these scandals in the news around the VA and stuff, and veterans not getting the care that they deserve, I decided to make an app, and it was called PTSD Free, and that was in 2000. That was in 2014. So the first prototype of the app, I wanted my dad to be my first tester, right? So I'm not counting him for feedback. I'm like, trying to find out what he thinks of the app, and it was a really cool app. It predicts your stress and it shuts it down with stressed upper breath work 2 minutes before your stress is triggered. So I really wanted to know what he thought of it. So he's like ducking me. It's taking me like a month or 6 weeks. I'm calling him, So he's like, Brett, I'm so sorry. He's like, I'm just not an app guy. You know what I mean? And he had huge hands, right? He was a construction worker and a firefighter, and he built buildings with his hands, and he was a car mechanic and stuff as well. So his hands were tremendous. So just thinking of him, like trying to use an app, looking back on it, I should have known that would have been hard for him. But so I said, Dad, it's okay that you can't use the app. It's no problem, right? But I wanted to get a handle on your stress, right? Now, my dad handled his stress with a Budweiser can and mowing his lawn. He mowed his lawn like 3 times a week, right? It's what he did, right? And it was like a 5-acre lawn too. So I was like,
okay.
How
That
he
makes
passed
a bit
his
more
time.
sense.
He enjoyed it. Yeah, he enjoyed it. And by telling jokes, right? So, and talking to his friends and his family. So that's how I dealt with the stress. So, but I told him, I said, look, he was getting older now. And I'm like, I want to help you with your stress. If the app thing isn't for you, we could just do, a one-on-one session over the phone. And he was joking around. He's like, do you really want to pop the lid off this top? And I was like, Dad, I do. And he always felt his demons were too big for people to handle, right? From the war and stuff, and from other things, even before the war. So I said, Dad, yeah, I do. He said, okay, we'll do it. And I felt like it was a pretty surreal moment for me to connect with him in that way. And then the next day, he was shopping with his friend for a barbecue that they always did on Wednesdays. They called it Wacky Wednesdays. And I got a call from his buddy that he just had a stroke in the shopping center, right? And he ended up passing away 9 days later. And we buried him 11 days after that day that I spoke to him, and we agreed to do that session. So I mourned his death for 6 months. And it was very guttural, traumatic mourning of his death, because my parents got divorced when I was 6, right? And my father wasn't around for a number of those years after the divorce. It was too painful for him to come back to the house, right? And after the 6 months of mourning his death, decided to write the book and dedicate it to my father and have it as something that we both can be proud of, that the both of us will have forever. And I wrote it for him and for guys like him that might not be app users, right? That might not be tech savvy, right? But anyone can pretty much look in a workbook and use a pencil and fill it out and, and use it. So yeah, the book is something very special to me. It's cathartic for me. It's when I share it. I did a GoFundMe at the end of 2019. My first GoFundMe, we raised $13,000, and we got the workbooks to every veteran in a homeless shelter in New Jersey. So that was, very rewarding. And the book got out there, and it continues to get out there. I partner with other veteran nonprofits that help veterans and their families, especially veterans that have PTSD and things like that. And the book, continues to circulate. But yeah, I'm very happy I wrote it, and very proud of it. So that's why I wrote it. To answer your question in a long roundabout answer, that's why I wrote it.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss, and
Thank you.
The outcome of it is very heartwarming, and I think your dad would be proud of what I've read and the work you're doing with veterans to continue to help them through this PTSD. For a lot of people who don't know, who are listening, you published a statistic in your book that 22 veterans take their life every day. And so this work, I'm assuming, is a way to hopefully help alleviate that.
Yeah, so my goal is to get that number to where it should be, which is 0. A woman that I partner with, her nonprofit is 22 to 0. That's her mission. Michelle Ladd, she also has National Veteran Resources, and she has this amazing, huge RV that she drives around the country, and it just has like 22 to 0 on it. It has first responders on it, and it has suicide prevention on it. So what happens is she drives through highly populated areas where there's a lot of veterans living there, and people just come into her RV, and she has these communications with them where they actually bare their soul to her. She's an amazing woman. And then when they do that, they tell her things that they've never told anyone, right? And this is often veterans and first responders. And then after they do that, she gives them my book. So they leave with the book, and they have the tools to help manage that. Just like an amazing thing. Just the fact that that's happening, brings so much warmth, to my heart. And I know my father is super proud. He was proud of all of his kids. My father has 5 kids. He was proud of all of us. And I know he is smart. I still feel very connected to him. I did a lot of work as I was grieving to let go of the pain around his passing and to reconnect with the part of him that's still alive, right? I just can't touch him and talk to him now, but I still feel him. So often when I think of him, I feel connected to him through my chest. And we were very connected the last 3 years of his life. Like if I was having a tough day, he would literally call me like, son, I just felt you were having a tough day today. Is everything okay? And literally I could be having 6 months would be great. And then that moment when he called, I was having a tough time. So we were really energetically dialed in, before he passed. Which was great because we were very disconnected, and it was very painful in the younger years of my formative years as a child. So it was really, good the way we ended up.
And Brett, is there a website or a link for the 22 to 0 nonprofit that we can put into our show notes?
Yeah, so if you look up National Veteran Resources, that's her main site, and her name is Michelle Ladd, L-A.
So we'll get that into the show notes. That sounds very valuable.
Yeah, she's amazing. Love the work that she does. She's in the trenches.
Before we get into the 3 key stages to managing PTSD and dive deep into each one of them, do you want to just give the listeners a high-level overview of what each of them is? You somewhat already highlighted the third one being meditate daily, but we can cover what those first 2 are.
Yeah. So the first key to managing PTSD is learn how to stop a stress reaction, right? That's like step 1. Then the second key is process the trauma, right? So, and this doesn't even have to necessarily be, veterans, it's anybody. Anyone that had experienced a situation where your fight or flight was triggered when you were younger, in your childhood years or your teenage years, and you felt your life was in danger or you saw someone's life in danger, that is a scarring experience. And that affects how you relate to the world for the rest of your life. Okay? Whether you're aware of this or not, that's how our stress reactions work. Our stress is very smart. It doesn't forget anything. If you had a really traumatic experience as a kid, it is logged inside your central nervous system, that whole experience, what things smelled like, what colors were there, what people were there. And some of those triggers are still in the environment today. And that, when you get stressed, it's like stirring up a big stew. It's a subconscious stew of your past stressful experiences that stir up. And that's why we have overreactions. So processing the trauma is so, so important. So what I found is if you take somebody's 1, 2, or 3 most traumatic memories and you process the trauma and you let go of all the pain from within the memory repatterns with peace if it's done correctly, so that you could look back on that memory without any tension triggering in your body, without any stress happening. And when that happens, when you could look back on a memory and reflect on it and not have any stress trigger, I refer to that memory as resolved.
So our goal is to resolve as many of those memories as we can uncover,
Right.
which is part of what we do in the workbook, is uncovering the past traumas. Okay.
Right. We dive down the rabbit hole a little bit and we remove the tension, the stress, the anxiety from those memories. And then the last key, the third key to managing PTSD is meditate every day. And there is studies that were done, I think about 10 years ago. After 8 weeks of practicing meditation, PTSD symptoms reduced by 50%. So right off the bat, after 8 weeks of practicing meditation, right, you're going to reduce your symptoms by 50%. So if you skip through the first 2 keys and you just do that one, you're definitely reducing it by 50%.
You're cutting it in half.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a few people in my life, and this, we'll get to this with the next question, who I think are suffering from PTSD right now. And one of the things I've said to them and to their mom is, do you want to meditate together? I think it can help you. And so what you're telling me right now is, well, it should be able to reduce it by 50%. And one of the challenges is I think that they're somewhat caught in a state of perpetual anxiety from the PTSD. So the idea of sitting alone with their thoughts scares the hell out of them. They absolutely do not want to try it, right? There's such a fear, I think, to being alone with their thinking.
So we're creatures of habit, and this pandemic has gotten most of us like literally on a treadmill. And it sounds like the person describing to me is like they're on a treadmill, they're running really fast, and it's almost like you can't get off. It almost feels unnatural to get off. So for that person to sit down, it's going to feel so unnatural to just sit down. And sitting down for 20 minutes without moving, sitting up straight, not laying down and going to sleep, but sitting up straight with your eyes closed, for someone who's anxious is very tough. So in my classes, like when I was doing corporate classes in person, the first stage of the stress is gone method is doing these 12 exercises and movements to music, which are fun. And it releases all the tension out of your body. We say a few affirmations. We release any emotional tension with those affirmations. And then we sit down and meditate. I found that if the tension's released from the body, then it's very easy to drop into a meditation. So the Facebook group Release Stress Now with Brett Cotter has a lot of guided meditations on it, and it brings you very deep. Usually they're between 16 and 25 minutes. And I encourage anyone that you're, looking to introduce to meditation, just put on some headphones with them or just listen to it with them. And you can lay down, which is cool. So the best way I would say to introduce somebody that's in that situation is to have them lay down. Well, if they're really anxious, just verbalize how they feel. And that goes into the anxiety release technique, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which basically vents all the anxiety. Then they would lay down, put one hand on their heart, one hand on their stomach, like on their belly button, close their eyes and just listen along with the meditation for 15 to 25 minutes. It depends on which one you click on. But the Facebook group Release Stress Now with Brett Cotter has a ton of meditations inside the guides tab. So I encourage any of your listeners, any of your loved ones to just check it out. I'd love to hear your feedback. You seem like you've been dialed in to this, kind of lifestyle of tuning into your body, listening to your body, and healing your body, being aware of what's happening within your body. It seems like you've been self-aware in that regard for a number of years. So I'd be interested in your feedback as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to check it out. Even as I think about it, Brett, I probably have some PTSD issues from when I was a child. And, whether it's I was 4 or 5 and I was hit by a car while riding my bike. And that was my first, no 1982, 83, no helmets. And so that was the first of many concussions. And I can still vividly picture that day. And I have almost no memories from that until I was about 10. But I can vividly remember what I was doing, why I was on the road with my bike when I shouldn't have been, and turning and seeing a woman's face in a, one of those big giant boat of cars they had back then, staring at me in pure shock and fear because she realized I'm about to hit this little kid on a bike, and that then the memory goes black. And I've always thought about the memory, but I've never thought that there could be something painful attached to it that I should release. And to your point, that I should resolve. So going through some of those guided meditations and working my way through that sounds like an absolutely phenomenal idea to me.
Thank you for sharing that, number one. When I first got into meditation, I would meditate for a while. Like I really got into it. I had like an addictive personality, right? When I find something new, I like want to dive right in. So there were times, you think this is crazy, but there were times where I actually meditated for 8 hours straight. The first 2 years when I got into it, like I would literally spend a whole, Saturday morning and afternoon or Sunday, and just like, that's what I did because I wanted to see how deep I could go. And what I found was it's endless. But there would be times that like I would I would be in this space, this wide open space, and I would just feel something release, and I would see an old memory, like an old conflict or an old thing that happened to me, and I would see it just float away. Things I haven't thought about in decades, right? So when you tell me the story about, being hit by the car, I feel like I'm imagining you went unconscious, right? When you got hit by the car?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why everything went black and you don't have any other, memories from that moment, that day. But there could be other things where you might see how that experience affected your thinking, or like how you are in the environment that you were never aware of, how it connected, right? So, and it's just such a healing space when you're in a wide open meditation. Like I meditate now just to get a moment of no thought. Like when I have no thought, it just feels like I'm in wide open space, and it's kind of blissful and it's peaceful, and sometimes everything's black, so you feel like you're in the void, but there's so much peace in that too. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes, I know what you mean. And it feels infinite. It feels like it never ends. It can touch any place in the cosmos.
Yeah.
Past, and it's timeless, past, present, future. It's just, it described it to someone. It's in those rare moments when I can get there, where you almost feel as if you're connected to absolutely everything and everyone. And then all of a sudden the thoughts are back, and okay, I got to get back to my anchor. Can I get there? And it's just such a beautiful spot to get to.
It was, the experience of feeling connected to everything is like so divine. And when you could taste it, when you just get a glimpse and you could taste it in a meditation, it's like, that's why I go there. That's why I do it. You know what I mean? Just to get that. And when I was giving it more time, when I first got into it, I would be in it. Like there were times where I'd feel like I'd be in it for 45 minutes without thought. Like I could just drop in and be like, boom, I'm there. Now, because I have so many things going on in my life, and my life's a lot different, that it's hard, for me to get through the cracks in the cement to then find that spot where it all opens up. But it does. When I'm leading my meditation classes, I am meditating at the same time, and I'm just I'm saying what I'm hearing in the guided meditations. So I'm going deep with it too. You know what I mean? So it's that's a cool experience that kind of keeps me grounded in the meditation practice because I'm teaching it. I might not have as much time to do it on my own personal time. I still do daily, but not as much as I used to. But it's just, there's so much, the reconnection, and I feel like in this world today we feel disconnected. Most people with the pandemic, they feel isolated, disconnected from loved ones, from this, that, just feel disconnected in general. But imagine everyone knew how to do this thing where it was like an instant, natural reconnection with themselves and everything around them. That to me is the potential of how reconnective meditating can be, and how grounding Yeah, it's essential.
And it would be phenomenal when we think of, everything with social media, and the world today seems to be about dividing us versus them. Whatever the topic is, it seems like you're only allowed two sides now, right?
Yeah,
You're either allowed this side or that side. There's no, well, this part of what they say is reasonable and this
right.
part of what, right? There's no middle ground anymore. And I often think that if we could get more and more people meditating together, that a lot of that division and that separateness could hopefully be resolved, and people could start to see that you're not your opinion. You might think something, but that doesn't make you that thought. And maybe I can separate person from opinion and care about the person, and maybe question the thought or seek to understand versus vilify and attack aggressively.
You bring up a really great point on what's happening in the world today, especially in our country. But it's I feel like the meditative component brings us into a more authentic experience of being a human being. And being a human being, being on a planet with 7 billion plus people, we're here to connect with each other. We're not here to punch each other in the face and argue, right? We're here to connect
Exactly.
and help each other
That's
right? So I feel like we've been really duped into this fight and this argument. And literally half the country's against the other half. I mean, it's like I feel we've really been duped into hating the other side of whatever side you're on. Like, because the things you think about those people aren't true. It's what you've been programmed to think from the station you watch, and everything they think about you isn't true. That's what they've been programmed with at the station that they watch and the media they absorb. And it's almost like when you were a kid on the block and there's a kid that's like instigating two kids to fight. Like, he said this about you, he said this about you. And then they start fighting and the kid just started a fight. The kid in the middle that's not throwing any punches started the fight because he wanted to see a fight. Right?
That's right. That's right.
So it's almost like that's what's happening in a grand scheme. And to me, that's sad. That's sad to me that happens, because people in my family are on both sides, and it's tough to even converse. It gets emotional fast. It goes from 0 to 90 fast. And
yeah,
we've all been duped. I mean, we've been duped into this argument, and, questions why. Why are we in this big argument? And that takes a little research for someone to find out the answer. You have to stop arguing for a little while and really do some research on why the country's divided in half and why they're fighting with each other. You have to really want to find the answer to get to it.
Yeah, and spend some time not getting absorbed, not going into the echo chambers, not getting programmed by the news. I think I've literally just stopped watching any news whatsoever. If something really important happens, someone around me is going to tell me.
Right.
I can go online and look. Right? I don't need to read every night about how horrible the world is, because from what I see and from what I live and what I see around me with other people, the world actually seems much better every single day than it did growing up.
Right. And
so
the world that you walk outside your house and experience is 1,000,000 times better than what the news is showing you.
Exactly. So why do I want to watch that? Why do I want to see the worst of humanity instead of living an enjoyable life?
And the thing is, like, when the pandemic started, I started talking about consuming media consciously, consciously consuming media. So you choose how many minutes you're going to watch, when you're going to watch it, because we all know it's going to stress the shit out of you, right? So people that are watching 3 hours of it or more, forget it. Your heart rate is through the roof. Your blood pressure is through the roof. It's unhealthy. And the thing that scares me is seeing the trend of like younger and younger people dying of heart attacks. You know what I mean? And that was happening before the pandemic started, but the pandemic threw it through the roof. But I feel like it's like putting your finger in a stress outlet, watching the news, right? Your body is going to be stressed to the gills just by watching the news. So I unplugged from it a long time ago, a long, long time ago. Like I would say right before the pandemic, I was watching a lot. The 2 years before that, I was watching a lot. I got sucked into the political stuff. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, this is just way too much. because it's like to an unhealthy level.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would do maybe 10 minutes a day, and now I don't watch anything. If I do, like I would say once a month, I might go on TV and I might look at every channel for like a minute and a half to 2 minutes, and that's it. Just go through like across the 4 channels, and just so I could get a cross section of what people are saying. But to be honest, if I wanted to find something out that really was going on, I wouldn't look at any of those channels.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't look at any of them.
I forget the name of it right now, but there's a really good website that what it does is it takes the piece of news that's happening and it shows you on the page, here's what the left says, or here's what happened. Here's how the left is interpreting it. Here's how the right is interpreting it. And it leaves awesome. You to look at both sides and say, well, where do I fall on that?
Wow, I never heard of that. If you find, we communicate on email and stuff, but if you find it, please email that to me because I would love to see that. Yeah.
It's a great website.
Many years ago, an ex-intelligence officer worked for me, right, when I was in California. And he was working for me in a different industry. He left the intelligence agency, that line of work. And he showed me how to go through the news, right? He said, you can't just read one paper. And this was when newspapers were big. This is going back 20 plus years ago. So he's like, you grab these 3 papers, they're all very different, and then you look at the same story and you just highlight the common denominator. You read it and then you see, okay, that's in both, that's in 3. Then the common denominators most likely happened. And then you're just going to get the date, the time that an event happened, but you're not going to know why that actually happened. Each paper might say things happen a little bit differently, but you're not going to know the true reason of why it happened. But you're just going to get the date, the time, and just basically the facts. And that's how, to do a little bit of research. So I use that later on in certain topics that I cared about. If I was searching online, I would use like maybe 5 to 7 different sources that I researched to try and find a really good, batch of sources, and then kind of look things up from that way and then pull out the common denominators. But it's very hard to find truth in this reality. We live in a world of illusion, and we live in the misinformation age. So to find truth, that's where the whole meditation thing comes in. Truth to me, I feel intuitively. Like if someone's bullshitting me or telling me the truth, or if I read something, I see how my body feels on it. And I know the difference between a stress reaction and how my cells react to vibrating with the truth. So I go with my gut when I'm kind of gauging if something's true or not. I don't go with like a newscaster's face. I don't go with anything like that. Or like a channel that I like. I just go with how my gut, the signals my gut's telling me.
Based on what you're hearing.
Yeah.
Fascinating conversation that I know we both probably could talk about forever, but I want to get us back to PTSD, Brett.
Yeah.
So, war, first responders aside, what are some of the common causes that you see for PTSD that people out there aren't even probably thinking about when they think about PTSD that they should be aware of?
So it's basically when you experience something where you feel your life is in danger, or you're seeing somebody else's life in danger, or you see a loss of life. And that could be a kid. I remember seeing a cat run over when I was a kid, when I was like 4 years old, by a bunch of teenagers in a hot rod, and they ran over it a bunch of times. That was traumatic for me, right? And I can't even imagine. Like combat veterans tell me, and it's always shocking because it's so foreign to what a civilian, my eyes have seen, a civilian's eyes have seen. But what I do when I'm in a session is I remain centered and I keep forward with my technique. With no matter what the tension was, no matter what the trauma was, we just continue using the technique to unlock and release the core layers of trauma, emotion from the tragedy that they had seen. So it's crazy. I mean, my father was, when he was in Vietnam, he was like on the side of a hill in like this bunker, right? And it's being bombed. And he said every time he looked his head out, he just saw like body parts flying out of other bunkers, right? Because he was so heavily taking on fire. Will I ever experience anything like that in my entire life? No. Could I relate to it? No. But when I hear stories, really super traumatic stories from people, from all different types of people, folks that have been involved with sex trafficking, girls that were given to their parents' drug dealer for drugs, right? Just things that you can't imagine, right, happening to people, but they happen to people every day. So when I hear those things, I am in a certain zone to just allow the technique to continue going further and deeper until it unlocks all the pain and the trauma from the experiences, and they get the release and the relief and the repatterning within their body. So PTSD is the body's way of venting trauma that we're not in touch with, that we're not emotionally expressing, and that is still unresolved, right? So often when veterans come back from war, if a car backfires, their body goes into a huge stress reaction because it's similar to the sound of gunfire. So that's, a very basic example. So they become hardwired for these certain vents. Like it's like a vent for all that built up emotion and experience and trauma that was not processed. So I always felt like going into the military and going into the police academy, the fire department, in the academy, they should be, and in boot camp, they should be learning stress relief techniques, right? And then on the way home, when they're coming back home via, ship or whatever, coming across, an ocean, is a time where it should be really, group sessions, individual sessions, decompression, and a releasing of everything they've been experienced. Because they're coming home, we're creatures of habit. Our stress is super smart. It remembers everything, stores it subconsciously, and it's so hard for some folks to adjust. It's almost like taking a Ferrari race car with high test gasoline in it and then telling it to drive across the country, right? Full speed. The engine's going to blow by the time it hits Ohio, coming from New York. Way before that, the engine's going to blow. Like you can't just floor it. And what their central nervous system is happening when they go to war and in training, their central nervous system goes into overdrive, right? You got to be able to react quick. You got to be able to respond fast. But that's not good for civilian life. That's not healthy for civilian life. So there has to be, the way they program them to go to war, they have to be deprogrammed, decommissioned kind of mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually to go back to civilian life. And that's not happening. And that's the problem to me.
Not just dropped off at the bus station or the airport and
right.
Have a great civilian life.
Right. Not, one day in a desert holding, an M60 and then, a few days later in your living room, holding the remote control to the TV, right? Trying to find a job.
There were a couple of key points you mentioned in there that are basic terms that you talk about in your book that I'd love us to get the listeners clued into. The first one, you mentioned venting accumulated stress, in that if we don't do that properly, it happens through secondary outlets. And the second key was you mentioned the backfiring of the car, which I believe you talk about as displaced triggers. Can you just give the listeners the background behind what secondary outlets are and some examples, and similar for displaced triggers?
Yeah, so displaced triggers are just things that trigger you that are not a true trigger for that level of reaction, right? So let's say, I'll use myself for example, right? My dad wasn't around when I was younger, right? I resented that. So guess what? I resented male authority, right? So when I was in high school, I had issues with all my coaches in football, right? And I was not easily coachable, right? And if I was dealing with, an officer, someone trying to give me a ticket, I had issues, right? I had issues with male authority. I was always, rebelling against that. So displaced triggers with PTSD, it could be a ton of different things. It could be waiting in line, right? Being in line. It could be going to court, going in front of a judge, dealing with authority that way, dealing with a cop that's giving you a ticket. There's a story in the book of Kyle, and he's a veteran. He was actually in the video about the book, about the GoFundMe. And I coached him for a while. I got referred to him after the catastrophe at Sandy Hook. His wife worked in that school district as a teacher. I got referred to him and his family. And then a few days later, I was there and we were always working with him and his family. But me and Kyle's a veteran, we always stayed tight, right? We formed a friendship. And then I coached him over the phone over the years. And he told me, he's like, Brett, I know this program works because I got into a fender bender. This guy hit me. He gets out of the car. He apologizes. He says it's his fault. The cop comes up. He changes the story. He says, I hit him. He says, it's all my fault. He's like yelling, putting on the show for the cop. And he goes, when we all drove away, it hit me. I didn't even get stressed. And he goes, that would have made me lose my mind. You know what I mean? If that was a year and a half ago, you know? So, you know, that was very rewarding and he really took on the work. It was very rewarding for me to hear that kind of story, but he really took on the work. You know, he meditated on his own and he took the ball and ran with it, right? I give people the techniques. You could either do it a few times, get through a tough time, and then you forget about it, and then you're in another tough time a year later, and then you don't use it or you forgot about it. But the people that really take it on, it's a life-changing. It is a life changer. So, yeah, so the displaced triggers or anything that's not, you know, that triggers an overreaction. And it's, you know, secondary outlets is different ways that we vent. That could be flashbacks. That could be different ways of coping, you know, like drinking, you know, going out and doing things that are unhealthy for you. But really, it's just other ways that the tension is releasing in a non-healthy, you know, healthy way. The healthiest way is to embrace it at the source, right? To embrace it and verbalize it. Just verbalizing it starts to unlock it and release it, how we feel. You know, 2 years ago, I was very upset. So I went in the backyard and I just verbalized how I felt. Within 2 minutes, the tension in my chest just unlocked and released. Now, did I have to go talk to the person I was upset with? No. I just said how I felt, right? So I found this very helpful in my marriage, right? I'm super happily, you know, married, love my wife to death, but I didn't have a model of a healthy marriage growing up, right? I'm a child of divorce. So conflict in all my relationships with women was huge. And the thing that got me into holistic healing and this whole stress relief thing was my own jealousy and my own stress in my relationships with women. So I didn't figure that out until I was 27. And after I got to the root of the jealousy with the help of a facilitator and realized the root of where it all came from, after that session, I never had an issue of jealousy and it never ruined another relationship after that. So after I understood the root, and then it unlocked and released from the root. So when I realized where it was coming from, the trauma when I was a kid, the layers of jealousy I felt releasing from my body. Then underneath the jealousy was anger, that released from my body. Then underneath the anger was sadness, that released from my body. And underneath the sadness was the fear of abandonment. So the fear of losing love, being abandoned. And that was around my parents' divorce. But the way it was affecting my relationships was I was afraid that the fear of abandonment was keeping me angry and jealous, right? It was like teeth that was just chewing up my relationships with women. And until I got to the root of it, released it by expressing it and letting it go, by understanding the true cause of it, it would have just repeated over and over again. You know what I mean? I probably would be married 2 or 3 times by now if I never got to the root of it, right? But I was on a quest to get to the root of it.
Well, this has come up in a number of conversations on the podcast already, and the quote I've referenced each time is Carl Jung, who I believe said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to guide us and we will call it fate, right? And so you did the work. You brought out the shadow and said, well, what's causing this behavior? Let me get to the root and take out the root, take out the trauma and address the trauma so that you could alchemize it and move forward in life in a different manner.
Someone brought up that quote to me like yesterday on a podcast, and it's really amazing. There was a statistic that I read that our decisions that we make in the environment, 90% of the mental processing that goes into those decisions, every decision we make, is made on the unconscious level, on the sub and unconscious level, which means there's a ton of our decisions that are made on autopilot.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So it's that to me was like, wow. Like, and I feel like, you know, they say we only use a small percentage of our brain. That's just becoming more conscious. So I feel like as we become more conscious, we're going to be using more of our brain and we'll be more aware of the mental processing that goes into each decision. You know, and choosing, truly choosing, not letting this machine we call a body choose, because the body knows how to survive. It is programmed to survive, you know, but we're the energy inside of it supposedly deciding, but it's doing a lot of deciding for us.
Yeah, not
automatically.
letting 12 or 13-year-old Brett make the choice.
Right.
You making the choice.
Right. The
Absolutely.
adult. The adult.
Totally
And
aligned.
when we go into a stress reaction, we're literally reacting the past. Reaction. You're
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
reacting. So if that trauma comes from when I'm 5, guess what? When I'm reacting that, when I'm saying those things, I'm doing those actions.
You're acting like a 5-year-old.
There's my pissed off 5-year-old coming out, right? Or, if it's coming from a later trauma when I'm 12 or 15, that's the 15-year-old coming out. And we all know, especially in relationships, when we're reacting, and you could kind of sense where it's coming from. Am I behaving like a teenager right now? Is it? It's like
It's a good way to look at it. Yeah, yeah. Why am I yelling at her like I used to yell at my mom?
Yeah,
Like,
it's crazy, but
Yeah,
it's like it's just
absolutely.
becoming more and more conscious, and that meditation just helps do that so much too, because you
Mm-hmm,
start
mm-hmm.
losing those gears. Those gears start to float away. Those unconscious gears, that autopilot stuff starts to unclick and release the deeper you go into meditation. Yeah, and our buttons become much less pronounced. You
Well, what I was going to say is often you have the stimulus and the response, and what you're doing is you're just increasing that gap. So now instead of stimulus response that's unconscious, you've built the ability to have space so you can think about the stimulus, you can decide whether you should react to it, and if you do react to it, how you want to show up with that reaction versus a snap reaction, right? So that ability to choose, meditation and mindfulness absolutely increase the frame that you have in there.
One of the things that I do in the coaching and in the workshops is when we identify the most routine stressor in our life, and for some people it's a spouse, it's a child, it's a parent, it's a boss, but it's repetitive and it's like clockwork. It happens a few times a week, and boom. So if we could totally let go of the routine stress, we just jumped ahead light years, right? So after doing the work on it, finding out where the trauma was, releasing all that, then in a meditative space, I bring them into a deep meditative space. We look at the current routine stress, and then I have them seeing this in their brain, in their mind's eye, breathing deep and slow, doing stress upper breath work before they respond to the stressor, their routine stressor. So now they're able to sit in their mind's eye with that stressor, doing the same thing that stressor always does, but only they're releasing all the tension from their body, and they're pausing and they're waiting. And then I give them the question, what is best for everyone involved? And then when you ask that question in a meditation, you actually see the best way to respond for everybody, right? Not just you, like, how am I going to get rid of this person? I just want to punch, you know what I mean? Like, what's best for everyone involved? And then you might hear or see yourself in the meditation do something or say something, which is a great way to respond. So when that stress happens again in the real world, you have a whole new way of expressing and responding to it. So, yeah. But when you talked about the gap between the stimulus and the response, that's a way that I work with my coaching clients to really expand the gap really far, and then clear their mind and call in their own divine guidance and say, what is the best for all involved right now?
What is the best for all involved?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, right now. What's the best response for all involved? So it becomes less about my survival. But basically, when we're in a stress reaction, our body's in a survival mode. So if we remove the survival mode from that situation, now you can be authentic, and your own divine wisdom can come through to resolve the conflict, not add to it. So that was some of, I just felt it related to what you said about that stimulus and the the reaction component. And like, I like your imagery too. I know your listeners don't see it, but you had a really good imagery with your fists and coming apart.
Pulling them apart. Yeah.
Yeah. And like creating that bigger gap. And in the gap is where the magic happens, where you could actually clear your mind and call in a different level of your intellect to respond to that situation.
And make choices. You also mentioned in there a word that percolated something for me. You talked about identification. And Brett, for our listeners, whether it's them or whether it's one of their loved ones, what are some signs that they should be looking for? Physical, psychological, behavioral are the 3 that you classify in the workbook. What are some highlights that they should be looking for to know if they or a loved one may be suffering from PTSD?
I would just say their emotional affect and their desire to be engaged in life, right? So their emotional affect and their desire to be engaged in life. And I think it's tough when you're not living with a person, because we're in this like Zoom reality now, and like, hopefully with the vaccines coming out, hopefully this is all behind us, but we never know. But, the whole Zoom reality of like not really having holidays and, just being really disconnected. You don't know what's going on with someone behind the Zoom. So just checking in with people more, I think, is super important during this pandemic. Calling them regularly, not just texting, not just connecting on social media, but calling them, talking to them. FaceTiming has been awesome. Like, I was never a big fan of, talking to family members via FaceTime, but now I'm just hooked on it because it's like perfect. It's like
how else can you do it now, right?
Right. So it's, so that's really just checking in more. I think that's the most important thing. So their emotional affect, is their energy low? Do they have any desire to engage in life? Are they, no, I don't want to do that. That's when, if they're just acting in a lower energy way than they normally would, with lesser enthusiasm than they normally would have, and if they feel or look withdrawn, not getting outside, these are all really emotional wellness, killers, like staying inside, isolating. And it's been tough, because it's been what we've all had to deal with. So I would say just connecting them through the technology that we have, and, not cutting it short. It's okay if the conversation dies. It's not like we live in a different world. If the conversation gets a little dull, you don't have to get off the phone. You can still stay connected if you desire connection, and yeah. So just, really staying connected and following up. I think people that are suffering that connection, and if they have multiple people doing it, if there was anyone that you felt, loved one or friend, call a few other people and let them know that, hey, let's keep a tab on this person. Let's, talk to them more. Let's reach out to them more. Let's, in the book, I talk about having your support system. So it's a person that's going through the book and the workbook, they list out names, phone numbers, emails, you know what I mean? So that's your support system. These are people you should be talking to regularly.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So now, you may have spotted it in yourself. You may have spotted it in a loved one. And the first key is learning how to stop a stress reaction. The first thing you say is know when you're having a stress signal. And you brought up 4 ways to tell that earlier. I'll reiterate them for the listener so they catch them again. Heart rate, breath rate, mental state, emotional state. So when we're seeing disturbances in those 4 areas, we know that we have a stress signal. You then say to observe the reaction. Can you tell us how we observe the reaction and what the benefit of observing the reaction will be for us?
Yeah, so the stress signals, that just lets the light bulb go off like, oh yeah, my body's stressed again. Now I want you to get good at observing what's happening, right? Just like listening to your thoughts like you're listening to the radio, right? Watching tension build in your body like you're watching TV, right? This is very important because the statement, I'm stressed again versus my body's stressed again, is very different, okay? You want to identify with the part of yourself that's observing the reaction, not the part that's reacting, okay? So again, I'll say, when you're stressed, you want to observe it by just listening to your thoughts like you're listening to the radio. So what happens is when we're stressed, and if you say, I got to get out of here, you're really, that's like a loudspeaker, like, I got to get out of here, and you're like freaking out. Like, no, the light bulb's going to go off. You're going to shine some light on what's going on. Now you're stress aware, right? And now you're going to start to observe it. You're going to hear yourself, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Over time, that voice is going to get a little quieter, okay? Then you're going to notice where there's tension in your body, and you're going to watch the tension build, right? Usually it's the chest, the stomach, solar plexus, throat. It's going to watch it build, right? 10, 20, 30 seconds, right? And then you're going to put your hand on that area of tension. And this is where stress stopper breath work starts, right?
All right, so let's get right into it, Kit.
Awesome. So super simple. First step, touch the tension, right? So when you use the calm cells in your hand to touch the tense cells in your body, the cells start communicating and there's a transference of energy, and there's a balancing that happens. Every cell on the planet is programmed to return to homeostasis. So when the calm cells touch the tense cells, they connect and they start to balance. The next step is start breathing deep and slow. So now you're touching the tension, you're breathing deep and slow, following the airflow in through your nose, allowing it to cool off your brain, going down your throat, and just circulating throughout your chest. You could even imagine the airflow is moving through the tension inside your body, unlocking it and releasing it. And the third step to stress stopper breath work is once per breath, silently say the words, "I'm okay." You repeat those 3 steps together until all the tension goes away. So again, to repeat those steps, it's touch the tension, breathe deep and slow, and once per breath, silently say, "I'm okay." As you're doing that, just feel the airflow, follow it in through your nose, allow it to cool off your mind, moving down your throat, filling up your lungs, and just imagine it unlocking and releasing tension all throughout your chest. And what we're doing here is getting really in tune with our body. Okay, so you're becoming aware when you are stressed, right? When your body's stressed. That light bulb goes off now. Then you're observing it, right? So you're like a driver in the car. The check engine light's going on, you're looking at the check engine light. You're not the car, you're the driver in the car, okay? So think of it that way. Now you're observing it. You're listening to your thoughts like you're listening to the radio. You're watching the tension bill like you're watching TV. So when you identify with the part of yourself that's observing the reaction, not the part of you that is reacting, you're actually able to sidestep the stress. And that's the best moment right there to start to be like your body's mechanic and do stress stopper breath work. Now you're returning, now you're helping your body quickly go back to homeostasis. You're literally like a doctor or mechanic for your own body now, for your own stress. And those 3 steps are the quickest way that I found to bring the cells, the body back to homeostasis and release the stress. It took me 15 years to get it to the point of this, how simple it is. The touch to me is very important. And there's multiple healing techniques that involve touch, right? But what I thought about was, why when I was 5 and I stubbed my knee and it was bleeding, if my grandmother was just holding me and rocking me in a rocking chair, why does the pain go away, right? And what would your grandmother say? It's going to be okay, right? Something like that. It's going to be okay, and just rock you, and all of a sudden, you just become calm, right? At some point, your body releases and you just become calm because her calm cells, her loving cells, affected you. And you just allowed and let that happen on a deep cellular level. So that's where the touch comes in. So now we're embracing the tension. The breath, deep, slow breathing, science has shown us for decades that that alone manually switches gears from stress to rest. Just the breath work, just breathing deep and slow. And the mantra, "I'm okay," is actually the reverse logic to our fight or flight reaction. So the logic in our fight or flight reaction is I must run or fight to stay alive. So when your body, when these tense cells, they're tense because they're not getting the oxygen and the life force that it needs, right? Your body. So there's tension there. Your body's in a fight or flight mode. It's really worried about, something. And it's thinking, I must run or fight to stay alive. So what do you think happens when you take your calm cells in your hand, you reconnect with the tense cells? That starts the transference going on, starts the balancing back to homeostasis. Then the deep, slow breathing is literally delivering life force into each cell. Each cell now is starting to have less and less reason to be stressed out. And then the icing on the cake is the mantra. The mantra is being delivered into the cells through the breath, and it is totally reprogramming and activating your relaxation response now. Totally different set of endorphins, hormones, and the body literally changes its chemistry in seconds. When you first start doing this, it sometimes takes about 2 minutes or 3 minutes. With practice, the muscle memory kicks in, and when you first start doing it after a month or so of practice, it takes seconds to release the stress. It's just like reps. It's like learning anything. It's the cellular, the muscle memory. The cells start to get really smart to the technique, and they know what's happening. It's the fastest way that I know to naturally let go of stress.
And how often should someone be doing it as they're building up their practice?
So I think the best time to practice is at night when you're lying down. You put one hand on your heart, one hand on your stomach, on your belly button, and practice. And it's a great way to go to sleep. If you're having trouble going to sleep, it puts you out in a few minutes. If you wake up in the middle of the night, just do it again. It'll put you right out. People that have had sleep disorders for decades call me the next day saying, I can't believe that I got to sleep in 5 minutes. So it's a very powerful technique. Sleep is so important to manage stress, right? And for PTSD and stuff, if your body's not well rested, you don't have a shot at managing your stress, period. So rest is super important, getting your 6 to 8 hours, whatever your body needs, every single night. So practicing 5 minutes before you go to sleep, practicing for a minute or two when you wake up, this really gets your body the muscle memory. And with that muscle memory, you'll be able to use the technique in the heat of the moment, right? When you first start using it in the heat of the moment, you might let a minute or two go by and be like, oh yeah, I'm stressed, right? So now you got to remember that you're stressed. Then when you're like, all right, I'm stressed, you observe the reaction, and then you start getting into the technique. No one needs to know you're doing this technique. I have people do it in boardrooms and business meetings. If you don't want to put the hand on your chest, you can put it on your belly button, and you're just at a table, with your hand on your belly button, on your stomach, and you're breathing deep and slow, and that's all people see is you breathing. Everyone's breathing.
Yeah, that's right.
So you just say, I'm okay once per breath, and within about 30 seconds to a minute tops after you practice, usually it's much quicker after about a month of practice, your mind is clear and your body's calm, and you could respond to the situation authentically.
And Brett, is box breathing something you can also combine with that deep breath part?
Tell me what box breathing is. I'm not familiar.
So what box breathing is you take a deep breath in, you hold for, let's say, 4 to 8 seconds, deep breath out, hold for 4 to 8 seconds. So you're really just, to your point earlier, you're really resetting your system to shut off that fight or flight. You're just calming everything down. So it's a deep in and then out, right? With the pause in between on both sides.
So how long do you take the pause?
It depends on who's doing it. Mm-hmm. Usually they do, and they sometimes also refer to this as Navy SEALs breathing. Mm-hmm. And it's 5 in, 5 pause, 5 out, 5 pause, and just over. And that's why they call it box, because you're doing all 4 sides.
See, and this is so amazing because as many people on the planet there's that many ways to relaxation, right? So there's so many different ways. And if this works for you, then do that, right? If something works, ride it into the sunset, right? For me, when I hold my breath in the bottom of the breath or on the top, I actually feel a little bit of tension build because part of my body's a little worried about not getting the air when it stops moving in. So or going out. So what I've done with my meditation practice is I heard it many years ago from this meditation teacher. She said, taking silky smooth breaths. So whenever I'm breathing and I'm doing it, I'm doing silky smooth breaths, right? So there might be about a second of a pause, but that's about it, in between the breaths. But so mine is around 5 to 6 both ways, 5 to 6 seconds both ways. And then when I'm meditating, it gets way longer. Like when I'm deep in meditation, the breath really, really slows down. But yeah, I think that there's a ton of different ways to do it. And I bet if I practiced the box breath over time, my body would attune to it because our bodies are amazing. We get used to things. And then I could see how that could be a really powerful technique. Imagine they do it to slow their heart rate down.
They do it, but it definitely works with the heart rate. It also tends to, so if you've ever done a heart rate variability training, The Heart Math Institute has an app that you can use on your iPhone. It has a little piece that clips to your ear. But generally, when you're wanting to get into a high state of coherence with the heart rate variability, box breathing is often one of the tools they use. And there's something in, for some reason, the term autonomic system, it slows it down. And so it decreases anxiety. So where the Navy SEALs might use it as an example is when they're in that high stress situation. They use the box breathing to just effectively somewhat shut the system down and just bring almost an immediate state of calmness. And so to your point earlier, if I'm in a boardroom and it's pretty tense, I might no one sees it, but I just start box breathing. And now I can add this tool to the toolkit for the listeners. When you were taking us through it, I was doing it, and you might have seen, because we're on video, when I came out the other side, I was very relaxed. To your point, I felt like, oh gosh, I could go back in the house and go to bed early tonight. This feels great. So I'll probably do it before bed tonight, Brett.
So just to jump in 2 seconds. So like if you track your breath too, so if you one thing that we do, the way I open up all my meditations is, closing your eyes, you have your hand in your heart, one hand on the belly button. I usually have people lay down when they do it. So when you become really aware of your breath, you could feel the airflow touch the very tip of your nose when you first start to inhale. So we start there. So we bring the awareness, and it gets bigger and bigger. You start to feel more and more of that initial soft kiss of the airflow touching the tip of your nose, and then breathing deep and slow, following it a little further, allowing it to open up your sinuses, continually breathing deep and slow, following the airflow, going it deeper, and then unlocking and releasing all the tension from behind your eyes. So we bring it through there, through the throat. The throat, we unlock all the tension, the neck and the shoulders. And then we go down into the lungs, unlocking all the tension in the chest. And then we start going right into the heart, unlocking and releasing tension from every single part. And then we go deeper, and that's where the space opens up really wide. And that's where kind of our meditation really starts once we get through the heart. So when you're doing it, when you go to sleep, I encourage you to just track the breath, go through that little flow. And it's awesome. It's a lot of fun.
And that specific meditation you just talked about, I'll see that on the Release Stress Now Facebook group?
Oh, you go on that page, the Release Stress Now with Brett Cotter, you go into the Guides tab, it's on the top, and you'll see a few meditations. Click on it. They all start that way, and then they take you on a journey after we get through the heart.
Okay. Different journeys for different things.
So like I said, when I'm doing the guided meditations, it's kind of like whatever the group that's there that day, where it takes us, you know what I mean? The meditation. Okay. It's a little different every time. Yeah, but it's always a really relaxing, expansive ride.
I love it. I'm going to check that out. The next part, Brett, is we've learned how to stop the stress reaction, stress stopper breath work. We talked about meditating daily. The middle one is the one that may present some challenge. And this is where someone, to what you spoke to earlier, is resolving the memories that are attached to that trauma. So effectively, what you call this one is processing the trauma. Do you want to take us through how a person processes that trauma as the second key to PTSD? Thank you.
And I'll tell you the real gift of PTSD is working with veterans and stuff, and people that have been through traumas as young adults or adults. It's so much easier because they know the memories, right? But when you're working with someone that is not aware of the memories, like the one that I worked on when I was a kid, I wasn't aware that that's where my jealousy came from, right? I didn't remember that. But when the memory came up from the cellular level to the conscious level, I was actually looking around and saw everything like I was looking at it in a big movie screen. And I looked down, and that was the carpet that I was sitting on as a kid in that house that I lived in when I was 5. Everything was there. I haven't thought about that room, that carpet, ever really, since I was a little kid. And so it's harder, I feel, when you're younger and things happen that are like really deep and really far. But with veterans and PTSD, it's usually like a traumatic event, teenage years, or like combat stuff, when you're a young adult. So they know the memories, they're aware that it's affecting them, and most folks don't want to talk about it, right? So, but what I'm saying is the gift of PTSD is that it's easier because it's almost right there on the table, and then we get to start doing the technique. So if someone's in the workbook, right, the technique that I use to help them go into it is just look at their most recent, really strong stress reaction, right? So I have them go back to that reaction in their mind, visualize it from the start of the reaction all the way through to the most stressful moment. Then I have them pause it right there in the most stressful moment and identify the emotion that they're feeling that's fueling the reaction, and identify the thought that's repeating in their head, okay? And then the process is asking them to look back on their life and identify the first time that they can remember having that thought and emotion together. So you kind of float back in time to see when that thought came together with that emotion. And then you could go do it again. So the next memory comes up, that might be 10 years prior. Sometimes it comes up very early in childhood, but sometimes it's like teenage years come up. Then you just do that kind of float back technique again, and then you get to the root issue. And then that's when we start using the technique that activates the relaxation response. So when you hold the memory, the original traumatic memory in mind, and then you activate the body's relaxation response, you can't be stressed and relaxed at the same time. So what happens is once the endorphins start to kick in of the relaxation response and the hormones and stuff, the layers of emotion start to lift off of the memory, and you actually feel the emotion start lifting off your body and releasing in layers. So that's the technique, and it's really continually activating the body's natural relaxation response while you're holding the memory in mind. And then when I'm coaching somebody, I use another end of that technique, which is guiding the person through affirmations that help them let go quicker. So we're actually peeling off the layers quicker and unlocking it and releasing it from wherever it is in the body, and then melting down all the tension from the inside out. So the space becomes really clear where those memories were stored. Now, the area of tension, that's where all the emotional memories are stored in the body. So it's almost like your body's a database, right? So when you get stressed out in the everyday world, right, your everyday life, let's say something with your spouse or your kids, whatever, you get stressed out. Every stress reaction has an emotional tension epicenter in your body somewhere. Usually it's the solar plexus, stomach, or heart. Sometimes the throat. Sometimes it's the face. And I'm not talking about structural or like postural stress. Like if you're working at your desk 8 hours a day and your back hurts, that's not the stress I'm talking about. That's from just sitting down all day and not having good posture and not stretching throughout the day and stuff, walking around. So you get stressed out, say your spouse, whatever, you feel tension in your chest, you feel angry. The tension with your spouse triggered that subconscious stew of all the stress that is associated with that trigger. So that goes to previous relationships, and that goes to your mother, if it's your wife that's triggering you, right? Back when you're a little kid. So it's stirring up all this crap, right? And, your poor wife is getting all this crap. I'm just kidding. They do it to us too. It's just what we do, right?
Yeah, for sure. So it's the shadow.
Yeah. But the depths of it, so what I found was that if you could get into that area of tension and go deeper, do a couple of float backs, find out the original traumas in there, and then start using the energy and the relaxation response to unlock and release all the emotion from the original memory, all the other memories start to fall like dominoes. And when your spouse triggers you, there's nothing to trigger because you already let go of all that that area of tension. You let go of that rabbit hole of stress, right? So you're detaching the emotion and the memory from the trigger. So now when that behavior happens, to your point earlier, because you've resolved the memory
it doesn't stir up that same reaction or emotion.
It's like firing gun with no bullets in it, right? You still feel it. You still, like, let's say she does the same thing the next day after you process this, but you don't have the charge to like react with it. You know what I'm saying? So the emotional charge is not in you to drive your behavior to do that karmic dance that you were doing with her, right? With your spouse, him or her, right?
Great.
So that it changes the chemical interaction between you and the person you have this stress with. You're doing this dance with, right? Because now you're not dancing. So one person stops dancing. Now that breaks apart that whole pattern, right? Stress usually works with multiple people involved, multiple players involved, right? So you could be your boss, it could be your, son or daughter, it could be whoever, who you have stress with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a chemical dance, that's a karmic dance and a chemical reaction between two people and two souls, right? So, but when you go into your bucket of baggage and you process the emotions out of that stressor was triggering, you no longer have the emotional charge to autopilot and engage, to automatically engage.
Yes. That was the word that just right in my was flying out was it might happen. And I'll pick my youngest son. He's a small version of me. So he triggers me the most. And then the way I'm reacting to him is probably like a 9-year-old. And it's like a 9-year-old fighting with a 9-year-old, to your point earlier. And the more I do the work, the less I have a desire to engage. He can do the exact same behavior he did a week ago. And now I'll teach myself to just find it amusing. Like, oh, that behavior is kind of funny.
That's
like, why would I react to that? Right. And it takes time.
That's
definitely
a big part of my practice within myself, but also with my coaching clients. Because I say, I want you to see yourself giggling. When you see somebody when you see this trigger now coming at you, I just want you to imagine, oh, they're doing it again. Right. Yeah. I mean, just like inside. And it changes your chemistry, right? And it also helps you to be able to stay positive. You're not laughing at them. You're not, because that will make it kind of worse.
Yeah, that makes it worse. Yeah.
But you're just inside. You're like, oh, there they go again. You know what I mean? And you let them chase their own tail for a few minutes, and then they stop because you're not dancing with them.
That's right.
So what I always say, if it's like a coworker and you're no longer engaging in it, two things are going to happen. Either they're going to calm down and be cool, right? Or they're going to leave because they can't be around you because you changed the dynamic. So either they're going to sink down into a more calm place and get into homeostasis and allow your energy to affect them positively, or they're just going to storm away. Either way, you're good.
That's right. That's right. Because you chose not to engage.
You broke the chain. It takes one person to break the chain in that karmic and chemical dance. And I'll say I was going through the same thing with my son. So my history with my son, he's 15 now. From like 0 to like, I want to say 10-ish maybe. Great. We had the best time together. We would, I always say he taught me how to be a boy again, to play like a boy and also be responsible like a man. You know what I mean? So it was really amazing what, he taught me and how he affected me. But then, I was coaching him in sports and stuff. And then he went into this rebellion phase. And I remember it so vividly. We were in basketball and the kids had to run around the court, to do a few laps. And then he was walking while the whole team's running, and he's the coach's son. So I'm looking at him like, this son of a, like, I wanted to jump out of my skin. Oh, yeah. So he went into like this thing for a couple of years, like for like maybe 3 years or so, where he was really rebelling. If I said the sky was blue, it was black and blah, blah, blah. So eventually my wife helped me see a lot of this too. She's an acupuncturist. She's, I'm into like the meditative kind of Eastern philosophy, and she's into like the acupuncture Eastern philosophy. So we really connect well. So if I'm going through something, she balances me out. If she's going through something, I help her balance out. So we kind of like really click awesome that way. So she helped me see a lot of things. And then I started really applying this and learning this about how our children trigger us in certain phases and now our girls are 18. So now they're going through their phase, right? Of like, I'm an adult and I don't need to, listen to you. And we're like, hey, look, we're just trying to help you. You know what I mean? Like, we're just trying to guide you around a couple of potholes that you're going to step in. But,
Absolutely.
and we just have to let them do their thing. But with my son, the last 2 years has been totally different because I'm just not engaging and not taking it personal. Now, when we were getting into arguments, and even thinking about arguing with an 11-year-old is totally nuts, but I was arguing with him from my 11-year-old arguing with him, or my 15-year-old.
Of course. Yeah. You go back to where you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but it's been such a growth, an inner growth experience, and as parents, you learn on the fly. There's no class like 5 years before you're going to be a parent. You're going to go through this parenting class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's, you're learning on the fly,
Mm-hmm. So Brett, I want to be cognizant of your time too. Do you have time to go through some rapid fire questions that I usually ask to most of my guests?
Sure. I'd love to.
Okay. Oh, and before I forget, I don't believe, let's maybe tackle this first, that we've tackled the anxiety release technique yet, have we?
Right. We didn't discuss that. So when I was talking about the cycle, you have stress that goes unchecked, it turns into anxiety. That goes unchecked, it turns into overwhelm, and then that's unchecked, it turns into like the depression phase, which is very dangerous. We don't want to ever get to the depression phase, right? We want to throw the monkey wrench into the stress reaction. So now we empower ourselves with stress upper breath work. But most of us are in this, or a lot of us are in the anxiety phase, right? So when you're feeling anxiety, and we might not even know where it's coming from or what it's all about, I just want you to fill in the blank and answer these 4 statements, right? The first one is, right now I'm feeling totally overwhelmed with, and then you fill in the blank with the emotion, right? So I want you to label the emotion out. And this is a technique that helps you express how you feel, okay? Anxiety builds up when we're not expressing how we feel. The golden key to releasing anxiety is just expressing your feelings. So this is the first of 4 statements I want your audience and I want folks to share with others who have anxiety. So the first one is, right now I feel totally overwhelmed with, you fill in the blank with emotion, right? The next one is, the part that freaks me out the most is, and you just finish that statement. Let yourself just go in a stream of consciousness. Just start expressing yourself. Okay. The third one is, my biggest fear about this is, and then just verbalize your biggest fear, right? And the fourth one is, the worst case scenario of this situation is, and then you verbalize it. Okay. Now, when you verbalize your biggest fear and the worst case scenario, guess what? That's what your cells are freaking out about, okay? So when you do that, you're going to have a very big release. You're going to feel the anxiety releasing from your chest, wherever it's being stored, in your stomach. Some people have anxiety in their stomach when, they have to go to work Monday morning or Sunday night when they're trying to go to sleep. You're going to start to feel this release in layers, okay? Because you got in touch with the worst case scenario and your biggest fear. We talk about our decisions. 90% of our mental processing is on the unconscious level. Guess what? Your biggest fears and the worst case scenario, that's on the unconscious level. We're not always conscious of that. So when anxiety builds up, there's a ton of shit that we're not expressing that we have to express, right? We have to talk it out. And you don't have to be, you don't have to go to therapy for 10 years to do this. Just answer those statements and you've just expressed your feelings. You just express your core fear, the worst case scenario. You're going to feel the anxiety start to release. Now, could be a very emotional moment for you, right? You might start crying when you verbalize your core fear, right? Or you verbalize the worst case scenario. It might be traumatic to think about, okay? That's when you go back to stress stopper breath work. You touch the tension with both hands now when after you do the anxiety release technique, and you're going to be emotionally feeling very raw. You touch that area with both hands, and then deep and slow breathing through that emotional rawness, embracing your feelings with your breath and with your hands. And then once per breath, you silently say the words, I'm okay. All right. Now, that is so important. And I'm going to tell you where that part of that technique came from. When I was in a custody battle for my son when he was very young. I also went through a breakup with a relationship in the same week. So I lost her. I felt I lost him. And literally like I wanted to die, right? And I was sitting in a chair, and this was like, I was like crying for like 3 weeks, right? But I just heard this voice every couple of minutes in the back of my head said, "You're going to be okay." And that was like this like life-saving mantra that got me through that time. And when we're going through these emotional releases, your body is releasing emotions, right? You're not dying. Your body, again, it's the car and the driver, right? You're the driver of the car. The car stores emotions. You are the intelligent energy that steers and decides how to use this body, right? If I want to raise my right hand, I raise my right hand, right? I'm the decider. I'm the guy that decides what to do with my body. So my body's releasing all these emotions, embracing it with my hand, my breath as I'm breathing deep and slow into the emotional tension. Now, sometimes if someone's crying, like having those really deep guttural tears, you got to breathe into that pain. Breathe into the pain and embrace the pain. And then stick with that mantra once per breath, deep and slow. I'm going to be okay. I'm okay. Within 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops, you will be back to homeostasis. You'll be back to homeostasis. So the work that I do is not easy work. Like when it gets down to getting into the traumas, releasing anxiety, that's real deep, real life shit. You know what I mean? Like you're facing it. Sometimes it feels like talk about your accident. Sometimes it feels like you're facing a truck, right? When you face that original memory, you're facing a truck, and you are, right? Your cells don't know the difference in your body between past, present, and future. So when your cells see an image, they think it's happening right now. But we use that to our advantage by holding that stressful image in mind and then just reactivating more and more relaxation. So when your cells go, "Oh, it's not so bad. Oh, it's not so bad. Oh, it's not bad anymore."
So it thinks when it happened the first time, it actually was not stressful.
Right. It doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. That memory is logged into...
You're reconditioning it to be a stress-free memory.
It's almost like, it's almost like you're going into a library, you pull out the book. That book's always going to be there, but we're taking out all the emotions out of the book and we put it back in without all that emotional weight. Okay?
Love it.
So that's kind of like, how that works. So I'm really glad that we got a chance to discuss the anxiety release technique, those 4 statements. They're vital for getting through this freaking ridiculous, crazy pandemic that we're all in. And, whatever else life has to throw at us, stressed up or breath work and the anxiety release technique will always help you reground. And it is so empowering to have that in your tool belt,
It pairs really well. I don't know if you've heard of an author or read her book, Emotional Detox by Sherry Anna Boyle. She was the guest I had on last month, and there's a lot of similarities between what you're both doing. And one of her books, Emotional Detox for Anxiety, a lot of it is around processing the emotions, which not enough people tend to focus on. And a lot of what you're talking about is processing emotions, releasing the emotions. So it may be a book that you really enjoy and someone that you get in touch with. She also has a podcast. She runs a health radio podcast. I think you two would hit it off superbly.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I love the name of the book.
Yeah, Emotional Detox. It's absolutely awesome. And it's a similar feeling, Brett, to the breath work in that when you're done it, you just feel calm.
Yeah.
Right. And with both of them, it just releases a lot of that tension and emotion that you're both bringing up. So they're both beautiful pieces of work that I love.
Awesome.
So Brett, if someone asked you what your superpower was, what would you say it is?
Help people let go of their pain.
Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties at the end of the episode. I do want to leave you with Brett's contact information, though, so that will follow right after this. Thank you for joining us on the pursuit of learning.
So brettcotter.com is the best way. BrettCotter. I encourage you guys to hit the Break Free button. It's a free mini course on how to break free from anxiety. And it has 4 videos. It has 4 guided meditations. It has a worksheet that's dynamite. It has a freedom statement in it that, like, you basically are literally breaking free from anxiety when you do this thing. And then also I do my personal coaching from there. So you could just hit on the coaching tab, schedule a coaching call with me or a free intro. I encourage anybody that is really suffering with high stress or anxiety to reach out to me. I will do a free intro with you. It's a 10 to 15 minute call, but it will definitely take the edge off. And then if you want to do a coaching session after that, then we work out a coaching plan.
Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.